Hi everybody, welcome back to Storytime with Alex, where I have not taken my antihistamine, so if I sound very bunged up, just deal with it. Bring back pollution. Do I mean that? Maybe. Okay, here we are on, well, the penultimate part of From Albion to Britannia Book 2, The Last Witch of Old Albion by Brandy Pearson. The door is open. The people are through. Ruth and Miles are on the wrong side of the door and they've just seen a green girl. Is reality all about to crumble? Is this the end of the universe? What's going to happen? Let's find out. Okay. Chapter 13, The Green Girl and the Roaring Chasm. She stood at the centre of the glade. She seemed to be about our age. No one else seemed to notice she was there. She looked at us. Her skin was a pale green, not like someone who's about to be sick, but green like new grass. Her hair was the yellowy green of unripe wheat. Her eyes were blue and green and flecked with brown. She wore a long green dress that seemed to be made of oak leaves and came right down to the ground. She looked at us with an expression I could not understand, but unsettled me. Ruth took my hand. It felt very comforting. As we watched the green girl, she grew, now a teenager, now a grown-up woman. But the others there still did not seem to notice her. Then she started to grow in a different way. Not older, not fatter, just bigger. When she was about 12 feet tall, the fraternity suddenly seemed to notice her. They grew silent and still, gazing at her. "And who are you?" she asked. Her voice was big, not a booming voice, but rustling like autumn leaves. Mr. Campbell drew himself up to his full height, cleared his throat and said, "We are the fraternity of the ancient book. We have dedicated our lives to coming to this place of magic. We have risked all to come here. May I ask whom I am addressing?" She looked down on him. "I am Allbyon," she said, sounding puzzled. "Who else would I be?" "We have spent our lives seeking true magic. We discovered how to come to this place, and we have spent many years bringing it about," said Mr. Campbell, as if he were addressing a meeting. She looked at him and frowned. "There is no magic here. There are no people here. How could there be no magic? How could there be magic where there are no people? I am here. The wild beasts are here. The birds and fishes and those who crawl on the ground, they are all here. And there are cats. I like cats." As she said it, the hem of her dress rustled, and from underneath came cats. Dozens of cats. Black, white, tabby, ginger, tortoiseshell, Siamese, every combination of colours and kinds of cats you could think of. They surrounded her and snuggled against her skirts, purring so loudly that they seemed to fill my head. She bent down and smoothed some of the cats, then straightened up again, looked around at the fraternity, and frowned again. Then she slowly waved her huge arm in a figure of 8, and the fraternity of the ancient book shrank and disappeared into their clothes. There was a meowing and a yowling, and they emerged. All turned into cats. They huddled together unhappily. Ruth and I just stood there. "That's better," she said, looking down at them. Then she looked at us. We squeezed each other's hands for strength. "Why are you not cats?" she asked in her great rustling voice. I had no idea. My mind was a blank fog of panic, and I could not at that moment string one word after another, but Ruth spoke up. "I think it's because of these." She drew the amulet that Rose had given her out from under her coat. I did the same. The enormous green face swooped down closer to us. She peered at the little red bags, then stood up straight again and laughed. It was a laugh only just in control of itself. "Rose Cooper's magic. She cannot cross the bridge, but I see that her magic can." I found my voice at last. "We're sorry. We did not mean to come here. One of those people made Ruth come, and I followed. I was trying to rescue her." This sounded extremely lame, but Ruth smiled at me and squeezed my hand again, so I had the nerve to continue. "We were trying to get our cats back." I pointed to our cats, still in their cage on the trolley. They stopped yowling and were all sitting down, looking calmly up at Albion. She put her huge hand on top of the cage and they all started to purr. "Poor pussies, stuck in a nasty cage," she said. "Shall I let you out?" You can all come and live with me in Albion, that is, with all my other cats. We were hoping you would let us take them home. Their owners are missing them dreadfully, I said nervously. So these cats, did they not belong to these others? She waved her hand at the cats who had been the fraternity. How did they get these cats to make the spell? They stole them, Ruth said. Naughty kitties, she said, shaking her finger at them. Stealing is wrong. Although they were in the form of cats, they seemed to know who they were. They quailed as if they thought she might hit them. They were sitting together in a huddle, ears flat and tails down, looking very sorry for themselves. They meowed pitifully. I was beginning to feel sorry for them. This was not what they had spent all these years planning for. This was not what I was expected when the spell began, she said to no one in particular. That clever wizard worked it out so long ago, and for so many years on Holy Innocents' Day he made the door and the bridge, but he gave up. They tried to cross the bridge to this place, but never arrived, and I tried to cross the bridge to that place, but never arrived. He should have persevered. It was his duty. There must be a way for me to return. How can the land do without me? I've kept the place thin for so many years. I've been waiting for the door to open and the bridge to cross the black abyss for so long. Hundreds of years? I lose count of them. Waiting, waiting. I would send one of my kitty cats through from time to time to keep the place thin. They did not need the bridge if I sang to them. It's the magic of cats to open doors. I was hoping they would come home, but they never did, apart from you. She was looking at the cats in the cage again. She waved her hand again and the cage disappeared. She grew smaller again to tickle one of the cats between the ears. At first I did not recognize her. She was not in any of the photographs on the missing posters. Then I remembered Mr. Jackson's description. That's Gloriana, I said as calmly as I could. She came from here, didn't she? She laughed her slightly mad laugh. Gloriana, what a fancy name. I always called her Tiddles. Mr. Benson called her Gloriana because she was so grand, like a queen. People are so strange about their cats. Rose Cooper always had a cat. As we talked to her, I was becoming aware of a noise, not a noise of this quiet winter woodland, nor the sound of the purring cats, but a noise behind us. I looked around. There was an open door, just like the door we had seen on the other side. Just enough light spilled through from this world to see this end of the bridge. Still the footbridge over the motorway. The noise was coming from the blackness below the bridge, but it was not the roar of traffic. I could not quite understand whether the noise was growing louder or whether something was drawing nearer. What is that noise? I asked no one in particular. I know that noise, said Ruth suddenly. It's the noise in my dream. We skipped away from her as Albion danced past us to the doorway and looked through. It is drawing nearer, getting stronger. Soon I will have to close the door or it will suck us all away. She said this in a sing-song way as if it were a kind of game, but I realized what it was. It's the Black Cauldron, Ruth cried. It's still there, between the two worlds, I said. I could not destroy it, said Albion in her childlike sing-song voice. It was too strong with greed and malice. It cracked the world in two, and all I could do was thrust the cauldron into the crack. I tried to make the world whole again, but the crack was too great. Reality broke into two pieces like an amoeba, and then there were two worlds, and I was here in Albion that is. I need to get to your world. Her voice was suddenly louder, more insistent. To be the spirit of that land too. I have held these two worlds so close together for all these years, so that there is the thin place, so that once a year in winter time the wizard could make the bridge, but I could never get across. I felt the witch get her magic back, and I threw the wizard into the tree to save him, so that there would be a little magic left, one of each. I have waited for the wizard to find a way. If they could cross, then I could cross. I have waited so many years, and then these came, and you came with Rose Cooper's amulets around your neck. She whirled around to face again. She was growing more and more angry. Although she was the size of a normal grown-up, she was somehow flickering, so that you could see that she was really the giant lady, and she was standing between us and the door, and that worried me. I have so many cats. Surely now I can cross the bridge. I'm needed there. What land can it be with no spirit to guard it? She looked at us. What do you think? If I'm going to do it, it must be soon. You cannot cross the bridge. It was Rose Cooper's voice. Allbyon stepped back, and we saw Rose standing in the middle of the bridge, but not quite Rose, for we could see the bridge through her disappearing away into the dark. How can you speak to me here? Allbyon cried. Blood is thicker than water, said Rose. That young lady you have there is my great-great-granddaughter. There is enough of my blood in her to make the link, even though I can never cross the bridge. Allbyon, you cannot cross the bridge. I can if I want to, said Allbyon, flouncing about like a little girl. No, said Rose calmly, you can't. The wizard is here. He knows this bridge as well as any. It will not take you across. You will fall into the cauldron and be lost forever. You are lying. Let him tell me himself if it's the truth. He has no blood here. He cannot speak, and I will not listen to you. She was starting to shriek. It was like listening to a small child holding a gun. We do not have the time for this, said Rose. Let the children return with the cats, and they will get across safely, but we need to hurry. Allbyon was standing in the doorway, and it was clear to me that Ruth and I were in terrible danger. All I could think of was my mum and dad having to tell Ruth's mum, and as soon as I thought of my mum and dad, I wanted to cry. Suddenly, I heard a man's voice swear loudly. With his hand on Rose's arm, Sebastian appeared. He was even more transparent than Rose, but also terribly pale. His duffel coat had gone, and there was a strip of cloth wrapped around his shoulder where he had been shot, which was red with blood. He was using a brush like a crutch, the head of the brush under his good arm. Allbyon, he called in a voice I'd never heard him use before, full of anger and power, listen to me. I have spent 348 years studying this thin place. I did not know that it was you who kept it in being, but I do know that neither Rose nor I can cross the bridge, because our lives and our long years are bound with this land, and I am certain that you cannot cross the bridge either, for you are bound to the land where you are, to Allbyon that is. You are the spirit of Allbyon that is. You are not the spirit of this land. Then your land has no spirit, Allbyon wailed. I tried to save it all, the land and the people and the magic from that stupid wizard and his insatiable cauldron, but everything broke. I've been trying to get back to you and to Rose, to bring old Allbyon back again. But you can't, Allbyon, said Rose gently. I could hear tears in her voice. You did all you could, but you could not fix it all. She started to sing quietly. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. This seemed to calm Allbyon, but now she was crying, sobbing great green tears. If I cannot come to you, and you cannot come to me, what will become of you? You live in a land with no spirit. I'm sure there is a spirit of this land, Allbyon, said Rose. For a second, a ghostly hand appeared and handed Rose a coin. Rose looked at it and laughed. I recognised it as one of the things my dad always had in his pocket. It was an old copper penny. There is a spirit of this land, Allbyon, said Rose. There's even pictures of her. Her name is Britannia. When the two lands split, she was here. Perhaps she's your daughter. There is a spirit in every land. Allbyon stepped back away from the door. The roaring noise was growing louder, but for a moment Allbyon was silent. Then she seemed to pull herself together. Then I must close this thin place forever. Then the black cauldron will sink into nothingness and we will all be safe. Allbyon and Britannia. Allbyon, my dear, said Rose, thank you for saving us all, and thank you for my magic. Thank you for saving me from the black cauldron, and thank you for all these years, said Sebastian. He took his hand from Rose's arm and disappeared. Send back the children and the cats, and the rest of them. They are fools who would only cause you trouble, said Rose. Allbyon looked around, as if noticing us all for the first time. She looked at the huddle of cats who had been the fraternity. She pointed at them and then said sternly, Go, return to Britannia. Without a second's hesitation, the cats bolted across the glade and through the door. I was alarmed to see that the bridge was beginning to fade or crumble, as if it were made of paper and was beginning to blow away. "Rose!" Allbyon shouted to make herself heard above the roar of the cauldron. "Call your cats home!" Rose, who seemed more transparent now, called out, "Here, kitties! Come to me, my pussy cats! Your hearths and those who love you wait for you." The cats of Aubrey Triangle had been sitting contentedly looking at Allbyon, but now they stood up and stretched and walked through the door and across the bridge, unconcerned by the terrible noise and the way in which it was rapidly fading. "Miles and Ruth, you'll have to hurry," Rose called to us. Allbyon stood aside to let us through, but the bridge was fading fast. "There's nowhere for us to walk. It's too late," Ruth cried, for the bridge was now just a ghostly suggestion of lines across the roaring darkness. Suddenly Sebastian swore again, and we could see him with his hands on Rose's arm again, looking even paler. "Stephen," he said to my father, who he could not see, "hold me up in case my legs go out from under me." My dad's arm appeared around the wizard's chest. Sebastian lifted up the brush and pointed the handle at us. "Miles and Ruth," he called, "hold on tight to one another and look at me." Ruth and I put our arms around each other and held on tight. "Do not take your eyes off me," he called. We stared fixedly at him, as if our lives depended on it, which they did. I realized that we were no longer standing on the snowy ground. "I know I'm not pretty, but look at me anyway," Sebastian shouted. We gazed at him, trying to ignore the darkness behind us, the other door that seemed so far away, and the bridge that had all but gone. As we floated across the chasm, I could feel something tugging at my feet. "Keep looking at me. I will keep you safe," he called. I thought of the roaring emptiness below and the story of the black cauldron. It was strangely tempting to look down. Ruth whispered in my ear, "Look at Sebastian." It was a strange sight. He was one hand on Rose's arm and the broom held out before him. His legs were sagging, but I could see my dad's arm holding him up. As we reached the door, he dropped the brush and we tumbled through the tiled floor of the crypt. Sebastian was lying on the floor before us. He had fallen backwards onto my dad. As I struggled to my feet, a voice floated through the roaring from the other side of the chasm. "Are they safe?" came the voice of Allbyon. "Yes," Rose shouted back. "Everyone is safe." "Then goodbye, all of you." "Goodbye, Allbyon," Rose shouted back. Just before the door closed, Allbyon called out, "Goodbye, Tiddles." The door slammed shut and disappeared. This time there was no unearthly light. The thin place had gone. "Is he dead?" Ruth cried. I looked down at Sebastian, who was white as a sheet. "Good gracious, no," said Rose, kneeling next to him. "He's fainted because he's bleeding so much. Let me look after him." Dad extricated himself from beneath the unconscious wizard. Mum rushed forward and nearly suffocated us with hugs. I thought you'd been marooned. I couldn't see or hear anything across the bridge. I'm so happy, Miles. I could kill you for running after Ruth, but I'm so proud that you did." Eventually she let go and I looked around. Rose was surrounded by the cats from the Triangle, who were rather getting in the way of her dealing with Sebastian's bullet wound. The members of the Fraternity of the Ancient Book had evidently returned to their human shape. Sadly, their clothes and all their belongings and bags were in Allbyon. They huddled in a corner trying to cover themselves up. Father Joe had found a big roll of bin bags and was giving them out to them to cover themselves. They were shivering from shock and from the cold. When Sebastian had come around, Rose, who had many layers of clothes on, distributed some of her cardigans and jumpers, and Father Joe lent Mrs. Campbell his heavy black cloak, which she wrapped around herself with great relief. When Sebastian could walk again, leaning on my dad, we all trudged back along the tunnel. We emerged into the garden of Mr. and Mrs. Brown's house. "The key!" Mrs. Brown wailed. "I've lost the key to the back door." "Allow me," said Sebastian a little faintly. He pulled his wand out of the back pocket of his jeans, pointed at the lock on their back door, and it clicked, and he opened the door. The fraternity all fell into the house with great relief. They were in a pitiful state. Father Joe herded them into the lounge where it was warmest, then went upstairs to ransack the Browns' wardrobes and drawers for clothes. Mum made hot sweet tea for them, for the shock, and found hot chocolate, which she made for the rest of us. Sebastian drew a silver flask from his pocket and laced the steaming drinks with whiskey. Making sure that my mum didn't see, he even put a drop in mine and in Ruth's. It felt hot as I swallowed it, and it warmed me even more than the chocolate did. Dad had phoned Miss P, who had been sitting in her cottage worrying about us all. Ruth and I, Mum and Dad, and Father Joe eventually returned to her cottage. Rose, whose power to herd cats was extraordinary, borrowed my notebook and led the cats away to return them to their surprised and delighted owners. Dad carried Misty home, and Father Joe carried Gremlin. Rose had taken Gloriana, or Tiddles, to Mr. Jackson's with Tommy, and he promised to return her to Mr. Benson in the morning. We left Sebastian with the former fraternity of the ancient book. He never told us what he said to them, and they were already traumatized by what had happened. After his talk with them, he took them all back to their respected houses and used his magic to unlock their front doors, as none of them had keys anymore. It seemed to me that days had passed in the crypt, and in Albion that is, but it was actually only 6 o'clock that day when all reassembled in Miss P's living room. She had got out all the Christmas leftovers, and Dad made turkey sandwiches with cranberry sauce, which tasted like the best food ever. We were all exhausted and did not talk much about what had happened. Dad went home and got the DVD of an old James Bond movie. Somehow none of us fancied any fantasy films. By the time Ruth's mum came to collect her, we probably all looked fairly normal. Rose had removed the bullet from Sebastian's shoulder, cleaned the wound, and put a couple of stitches and a binding spell upon it, and bandaged it up with proper bandages from Miss P's first aid box. Dad gave him an old t-shirt, and he looked quite reasonable, if still a little pale. "Good evening, everyone," said Ruth's mum. "I hope you've had a good day. I got a lot of work done. I see Gremlin is here. Did you get all the cats back?" "We had our story sorted." "It was one of our neighbours," said Miss P, "having a bit of a breakdown. He shut them all up, but he'd fed them, and they're all okay." "Why did he do that?" asked Ruth's mum. "It's so difficult to be sure, really," said Miss P breezily. "Some mad idea got into his head about magic or something. In the end, he gave them back to us. Saw the error of his ways." "Are you going to report him to the police?" "To be honest, he's in such a state we decided not to. He probably needs a doctor rather than a policeman. We'll keep an eye on him, make sure he doesn't do anything like this again." "Well, I'm sure you know what you're doing, May. I hope Ruth didn't get in the way." "Oh, no. She was one of the heroes of the day." Ruth and I looked at one another. And that is the end of that chapter. Do join me again next time for the epilogue. Yeah, see you then.